Okay, this is the Boldly Ambivalent podcast. I haven't recorded in a little while, so I'm a little bit scattered. Today I'm talking to Kit. I found Kit on YouTube. She was recommended to me actually by YouTube. And hopefully today she'll help me understand schizophrenia, bipolar type stuff. And I'm really feeling unprepared right now, even though I'm not. Anyways, I'm just wondering. Yeah, I chose you because what are the thing? Ultimately, I choose people because I think I can imagine having a conversation with you. And then, other than that, you seem pretty direct, straightforward in the way you explain things. And then you added a more scientific angle to things, which is interesting, and had a scientific background. And it was just an interesting combination to me. And at least back when I was some years ago, when I was looking into YouTubers who would talk about mental illness and explain it from their own perspective, um, I didn't find a lot of people talking about schizophrenia. And that probably has changed. I haven't looked in the last few years, but then, like I said, YouTube just suggested you and I start watching your videos, and that fit the bill. Yeah, so, if there's anything else you want to say about you and your channel and how you approach things, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we can get right to it.
Well, my YouTube channel, my whole tagline is that I make the uncomfortable comfortable because talking about mental illness can be extremely uncomfortable, but we want to normalize it. In order to normalize it, we need to talk about these things. So my whole mission is to, yeah, make the uncomfortable comfortable. And I do that by bridging the gap between life and science to break the stigma around mental health. So,
Right, right. And likewise, I mean, the reason why I thought you'd be a good fit is because, uh, while broadly speaking, my goal with the podcast is to talk to people with all sorts of experiences, just to learn from them. I'm particularly interested in people with various conditions who can help me to understand what it's like, and that can talk in a very direct, personal way that you wouldn't necessarily get with someone who is just a friend, because you'd only get so invasive in your questions, and slowly over years you'd learn. Whereas this, my goal is to have an environment where we're both more curious and direct than we normally would be. And hopefully it'll produce a good conversation. And I try to ask questions that I'm interested in, and hopefully people listening will be as well. And I did have one note, which was that if I bring up any of my own experiences, I don't have anything diagnosed. I don't know. I mean, there's, throughout life you have different times where you're anxious or you're this or you're that, but I don't have anything diagnosed. However, I will bring up various experiences of my own to try to help me understand yours. And it's not because I'm suggesting that I have that, like I'm trying to diagnose myself or anything. It's just as a way to understand what you're talking about and say, oh, well, what about this? Like, one thing I'm curious to talk about later is whether there's any similarity, for example, between sleep paralysis and psychosis, if that's the right term. Because sleep paralysis is something I've had, and it was an interesting experience. Um, so things like that. It's just I will hope to bring up some comparisons like that, just to see if I can kind of understand. Because I'm really interested in seeing if I can take something that seems completely foreign to me and actually getting a feel for it and understanding it to some degree. Um, and yeah, so that's it. The other thing is, I was wondering. I'm really not into disclaimers much, but do you think it makes sense to offer a disclaimer in this case?
well, the biggest thing I always tell people is that the things I say are not meant to be taken as medical advice. I cannot diagnose or treat anyone's condition, and the stuff I say is basically for educational purposes only, and I'm no substitute. Like now, you and I are no substitute for a doctor, a therapist, or other mental health professional. So yeah.
Although I sometimes like to think of myself as an armchair psychologist, but yes. And so otherwise, there's very few limits as to what we're going to be talking about, and let's go. So, my basic plan with any of my conversations is to kind of just kick things off and then see what questions come up. And so, with that in mind, I guess on another podcast you were talking about sort of how you came to have the diagnosis you have now, and that it turns out to be a considerable time consuming adventure for a lot of people. So something like that, or early memories of what that you now see as being part of schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever.
Well, the hard thing is that what I technically have, I have something called schizoaffective disorder, which is a condition where someone experiences symptoms of schizophrenia, such as delusions or hallucinations, but also having symptoms of a mood disorder, either major depression or, in my case, bipolar. And I wasn't diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder until late 2020. And before that, I was diagnosed with several different kinds of bipolar disorder. I started off by being diagnosed with cyclothymia in high school, bipolar 2 in college, and then bipolar 1 shortly after I had my psychotic break, which was right after I graduated college. And really, a lot of my struggles have been shaped by the bipolar side of the condition. The psychosis did cause issues after college, but I've been hearing voices since I was in middle school, and they didn't cause any level of distress until much later. They were actually largely helpful for me over that time. But it was the moods that really got me. And I would say that even all the way back in elementary school, I had symptoms of hypomania, where I would go through these phases where I would clean anything and everything for hours and hours and hours, to the point where it was kind of a thing in my family that Kit would clean her room when she got in a cleaning mood. And I know that now to be hypomania. So that's really the earliest signs of that. I think I started experiencing depression for the first time when I was in middle school, around the same time that my voices first popped up. But I didn't get help until my last year of high school. And then everything just got worse and worse and worse over time from there.
Right, and I think you said before, I'm going to try to make distinctions in the different aspects of schizophrenia because, and I know I'm have trouble keeping track of exactly what goes along with what terminology, but when you say that the voices started in middle school, that would be internal, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So what I experience is what are called internal auditory hallucinations. Usually when people think of auditory hallucinations, they're thinking of external ones, which are kind of like if someone's in the room with you talking to you, they come from externals. They're external hallucinations. But internal hallucinations are a little bit different because they happen in the same headspace as thoughts and internal monologue, intrusive thoughts, that kind of inner headspace. And so it can be a very interesting experience, and it depends on who you talk to. Some people say that the internal hallucinations are a little more distressing. Other people say external ones. I do get some external hallucinations, but they're primarily little mumbles, maybe like a door opening, simple short sounds, while the internal ones are the ones that I can have full on conversations with.
Right. Now that was something which I was thinking have you heard or do you have any theories about what those are?
What the voices are?
Yeah, like what going on at any level, what's causing, because immediately what I think of is two things. One is I think of dreams, like when I'm trying to imagine a voice that's in my head but that doesn't feel like me, I think of a dream. And that's the same thing where I mean, a whole not a whole world really because it's actually like a room or whatever your dreams featuring, but and it is all seems to be not of my making and yet it is. And then the other thing that comes to mind, I don't know if you've ever had this, is if I'm, say, listening to something with headphones and there's a conversation going on in another room or there's some ongoing noise. Sometimes I find if I can hear it while I'm listening through the headphones, I'll continue to think I'm hearing it, but then when I actually take them off, it stopped a while ago. And it's as if I just continued assuming it was going on and kind of hearing it in the noise. And I mean, when it's a pretty, like, I don't hear much of it. It's not like I full on, I'm hearing something. But I'm just wondering whether you have any ideas about what's generating those voices.
Well, what's really interesting is actually there's a phenomenon called hypnagogic hallucinations, which are hallucinations, usually auditory or visual, that happen as you're falling asleep. There's also hypnopompic ones, which happen when you're waking up. But there's kind of like that in between sleep state where things like that can happen. And they're often viewed as an extension of a dream. And people with psychotic disorders are more likely to have that kind of hallucination as well, even though hypnopompic hallucinations are very common in the general population. A lot of people have had them. But as for just me, like, just chilling and being myself and everything, I actually don't really have any theories about what they are. They just kind of like do their own thing and they're just there when they're there and they're not when they're not. I don't really know anything beyond like just it's a dopamine problem.
I guess
So,
okay. I guess what I was thinking is that I wonder if, like with dreams, sometimes I will have a dream and I have no idea where it came from, and it feels weird to me. Like I came up with that. That's sometimes it's intriguing, but it's other times I can clearly relate it to, oh, I was this thing happened the day before and I was thinking about it and it was bothering me, and so then it came up in a dream. I can kind of imagine the same as a daydream might. I might be going along kind of stewing on something or whatever. So sometimes it feels like it's something that I would come up with, and I'm just wondering if ever it feels like they're related to something, or does it just genuinely seem like they come out of nowhere, so to speak? Do they
I'd
feel
say
like
probably,
aspects of you, or
I mean, I'd say
like is
it
there
probably
one
just,
that says things that you like, the things you'd think but never say, or one that I don't know, like it could just be aspects of your personality, right?
well, when I first actually started hearing voices, I was actually wondering if I was seeing the beginnings of realizing I had like DID or dissociative identity disorder, which is formerly known as multiple personality disorder. And often people with DID will talk about how they hear their other alters or their other personalities like inside their head. And so they'll internally have those conversations. And I come across that a lot in the comments of my videos where people will be like, hey, how does that compare to alters and DID? And I did a deep dive on it when I was younger, but I realized that DID has a lot to do with horrific childhood trauma. And it also has to do with uh, having amnesia blocks and not being like yourself the whole time and having people have inconsistent views of you and everything. And so I ended up learning like I don't have DID, I have schizoaffective disorder. But it is an interesting thing because the voices, they kind of just do their own thing. They don't really seem like fragments of my personality in any way. They're just kind of there. And I've like wondered, I'm like, why are they the way they are? Why do they show up? Why are they sassy? Why are they angry sometimes? Why are they weirdly motivational? Like I there's no rhyme or reason to what they will do when they show up. And I think it's really interesting actually, and
Hmm.
something I'm continually exploring and learning about. Because
Yeah,
they
I
are really
mean,
like real people that I can have interactions with and talk to, and they'll talk back to me. Like they are like other people. They're just inside my head.
yeah, I mean, all the other difficulties aside, it sounds kind of fun to try to understand it. Can you hear my chair squeaking?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, my microphone's probably picking it up, so I will just run out for a minute and swap it because it's gotten squeakier since the last time I did this.
Better?
Yeah.
Much better, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm not suddenly really short or anything. Okay, so that was a little diversion, but going back to sort of the historical. So yeah, you went through several different stages of it, and this is something which I've found when I look into people getting a diagnosis of whatever it is they're getting a diagnosis for, is it can change and change as they tweak this and adjust this medication and do different things. It's not like it's just they figure it out. Um, so something which I don't know if it's, well, I'll ask it now, but I'm curious about, I didn't know until I listened to you, is that depression can have elements of, uh, it would be psychosis, would that be the correct, um, which I'd never heard of. Is there a difference as far as the nature of it or the intensity of it, or is it,
A difference between what exactly?
if you got someone who is diagnosed with depression and you've got someone with schizophrenia, are they going to have different kinds of psychosis, or is it potentially the same experience?
Well, I would say there's a lot of people with schizophrenia and a lot of people with like disorders in general do experience depression, but there is things like I would say when it comes to like the spectrum of psychosis and conditions, and it depends on who you talk to. Some people say that bipolar one with psychotic features and schizoaffective disorder are like basically the same on a continuum, and schizophrenia is in there too. But I would say that from what I know, people who experience psychotic depression and people who experience like schizophrenia, I do believe that the psychosis is very similar. It's not like the difference you find if someone like drops acid or something like that's a different kind of psychosis entirely. But people with psychotic depression do experience psychosis in a similar way that a schizophrenic would. So yeah.
Right. Okay. Um, so actually, I wrote down somewhere three terms: delusion, illusion, and psychosis. And am I wrong to see those as three different things? Or like
Well,
how does
So delusions are part of psychosis. So psychosis is actually a trifecta of three different things. You have hallucinations, which are false sensory experiences that can affect any of the five senses. You also have delusions, which are false fixed beliefs that you can't talk someone out of, they just believe them. And then the third thing is disorganized thinking, which is not one that a lot of people know about, but it's kind of like someone will say a bunch of words and they won't make sense. That's called word salad, jumping from topic to topic with no relationship between the bit. And it usually makes it very hard to communicate with others and to the person who's experiencing it. So delusions are technically under the umbrella term of psychosis.
Okay, that's interesting. That last, I forget what you called it. You didn't say just disorganization, did you? Or
Disorganized thinking.
because I met this guy once, and I don't know, he was very pleasant, thankfully. I was walking to a fireworks show just out in the city, and he started. I thought he was on the phone across the street because he was talking away, and then he came over, and then he was talking with me and my brother, and it semi-fluid, and then it would change. So it was, something like, "Oh, I was going to the grocery store, and then the aliens said that in the medieval ages, the blah blah blah," and then I was at a rock concert, and it was this never-ending sentence. Now, as I say, like grammatically, it made sense, and I started eventually. Initially I was nervous, and then I just started asking questions and trying to have a real conversation. But why did the mosquito? There was something about mosquitoes. Is it likely? You've already said you're not diagnosing anybody, but does that sound to you like that? I wasn't sure if it was just a drug or something because I have no idea. But does that sound like the kind of?
There are drug-induced psychotic disorders
Yeah.
as well, for sure. And they can experience any of those three trifecta symptoms. But yeah, no, it sounds like very disorganized to me if it's like jumping from topic to topic and just one continuous long thing. Like, yeah. Like there'll be days where I will say things and they will make absolutely zero sense. And I'm like, wait a minute.
But they don't make sense to you either once you say them. Like you can tell.
It's like I'll just blab out, and it also might be a medication side effect because I have word finding issues because of one of the medications I take. But I'll sometimes say like an entire group of sentences, and I'll hear it, and I'm like, that is not what I intended to say. That's not how I intended to say it. I need to try again. And so I tell the people around me, I'm like, sorry about that. Let me try again. I think it's probably more close with the medication side, but that kind of makes me think. I'm like, could it be? So.
Right. Okay, so I don't know, does it make sense, do you think, to proceeding? I guess what I'm really interested in is experiences that stand out to you in your life, just to illustrate. Like the sorts of things you talk about on your channel, and then I'll ask questions as they pop into my head. Okay, now here's a good one. You've mentioned a psychotic break. What is that?
Whew. So I did not realize I was having a psychotic break when I had it, and I didn't even realize that's what it was until much later. And it's different for everyone that experiences it, but for me, when it happened, so I just graduated college, and at that point I had a bipolar 2 diagnosis, but I was still hearing voices and hadn't told my doctor because I didn't know they were voices at the time, so I didn't think I needed to say anything. But I graduated college, it was a lot of stress, and then I moved to New York City, which was another bit of stress. And stress triggers episodes for me. It triggers the mental illness. It's the whole reason I'm mentally ill at all, frankly. And when I moved to New York that fall, I had kind of been having this buildup in my head of what are called religious delusions. So I was raised in a Christian household, and keep in mind, I'm not bashing Christianity. I'm not bashing religion in any way, shape, or form while I say this, but the way my brain worked at that point is it basically created the God of the Old Testament, who is very angry, upset, punishing, and everything. It kind of like created that. And I thought that was God because I was experiencing, like, he would talk to me sometimes. I got emotions, I got feelings, and it was really easy to slip into that, especially when, for the most part, the people around me in church and whatnot, like I had people envy my connection to God. And I didn't know that it wasn't real, but it was slowly building up over the course of probably a year before I moved to New York. And it was kind of like laying under the surface. And it was almost a prodromal phase of a psychotic episode, which is like the first phase where people start withdrawing a little bit more, get a little bit more into psychosis, but they're not experiencing any crazy acute symptoms yet. And so I had all that building up. And then when I moved to New York, it all got so much worse. So I was experiencing this God's emotions. He was talking to me more. And the thing that really scared me a lot was that he would tell me that people I cared about were going to die. And it was incredibly difficult to go through because I'm going through my life thinking that my whole purpose is to know that people I cared about were going to die somehow. I could do nothing about it. And it was just my job to know. That was what the God had basically told me about. And I remember this point where, and I won't cuss on your podcast, but
Whatever works for you.
I'll say the censored version. So I remember being really deep in it where it was past the point where I realized, okay, this has to take priority. What I didn't know at the time, but my delusions were taking priority. The hallucinations were taking priority. It was my life. I could not ignore it. And I had lost track of reality. Like I didn't really know what was real, what wasn't. And I remember thinking very distinctly to myself, if this is real, I'm screwed. And if this is not real, I'm screwed. And so each option was equally terrible to me. So if my brain was making it all up, it was horrible. But if it wasn't and it was real, it was also horrible. And in looking back on it, obviously I'm glad it wasn't real. I have medication, I have treatment, I'm living a fairly decent life now. But at the time, that's where I was. And so I would say the whole point of it being like called a psychotic break really just comes down to the fact that I had lost touch with reality. Like I was so disconnected from everything that I didn't have that break from reality. So does that make sense?
Well, it does. I'm just okay. I'm wondering a couple things. One is, I'm wording this like it's sort of a stupid question, but it's not. But what made those things believable? I understand that you'd already were accustomed to having different personalities in your head talking to you, and that just seemed normal. But wasn't this several steps above that? And did you? It sounds like you only really doubted it once it got quite extreme after months, right?
So that's the thing about delusions. It's really hard for me to explain to people. And it's that the whole point is that you believe them.
Right.
So it's almost like it's built into it that you believe what they're saying. Because like people with paranoia, they'll think people are after them, even though no one is. And so but they firmly believe it. There's no, there's not really facts to back it up. It's just a belief that you hold on to for no reason whatsoever. It's just your brain makes you believe it. And it's like, for example, it's like trying to tell someone the sky isn't blue. It's like, it's blue. It's blue. You can't tell me it's not blue. Why do you believe it's blue? Because it's blue. So.
Right. But I'm still wondering, this is something where it's popped up. It's not like you always thought it. So is there anything? I'm not looking for a rational explanation. I'm just from the point of view of what it's like. I'm trying to imagine what it would be like. Can you think of anything like that where you believe something or feel like, is it more of a feeling that like, okay, if you're hearing someone talking in your head, that's a reason to believe it. There it is. But is there anything else that any other experiences that are similar to that you can think of, just to help me understand, where you just come to believe something without being convinced of it? Or
I honestly, it's so wild to me that my
yeah,
brain can do
because
that.
it's really important, like, to try to understand and to not just like, one of my interests in talking about schizophrenia is that, to me, it's like it's the big crazy thing, right? That's when you say crazy, that's often what you're referring to. And so I want to try to understand it so that it actually makes as much as it can sense to me. Um, and this has got to be one of the big stumbling blocks. Obviously, you'll know any family member or something, you might think, well, they think this thing that seems pretty off the wall, or like, it's not like lots of people think strange things. But as far as something that just kind of pops up, I'm just trying to think if there's anything that's like that. One thing I wondered about, going back to dreams, that's the obvious thing, I don't know if it's useful, that comes to my mind as a sort of a crutch to help me understand this, is there's a kind of a nightmarish state of mind. Like, if you wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, or you're sick, or like sometimes being sick will kind of throw me off. Or like the sleep paralysis experience, which, for those people who don't know, is where in many ways you are awake, as I understand it, but you're also slightly not all there. And you wake up and your body has actually paralyzed itself, because it does this when you're asleep so your dreams don't make you run around or something of the sort. But you're aware of it, and then the way you interpret it gets weird. You can look up, if you type in sleep paralysis and do an image search on Google, you'll see pictures of people with demons at the foot of their bed and stuff. Because in my case, when it just happened to me a string of nights, It was stuff that really didn't sound that disturbing. Like it was a cat walking around on my bed. It might even have been purring, and I've lived with cats all my life. That doesn't sound like a scary thing, but it was the fact that I couldn't move.
Hmm.
There was the time that there was the human breathing that featured, but the point is, it felt real, unlike a dream. It felt real when I woke up the next day. Whereas, you wake up the next day and so that was a dream. This had actually felt real. But the point is that there is a state where it's easy to kind of believe anything. Um, and where emotions will cause, I would think, me to be more likely to believe things. Does that sound at all relevant? Like,
Yeah,
because a
so
lot
the
of these
dream,
things sound like there's a hint of nightmarish quality to them. I don't know how many positive um, uh, illusions you can have or delusions. Are there many, or are they always kind of fearful and unpleasant?
well, what's interesting is that actually, if you look at the nature of psychosis in different cultures, it changes. So basically, I wish I could find the paper where I read this because I love reading research studies, of course, as a scientist. And there was a study that they did where they looked at the content of psychosis in people back in the 1940s and the 1950s, and they found that often the delusions and hallucinations had a positive value. And it was usually people think, oh, an angel's talking to me, telling me to do good things. Oh, and then they would be a decent person and everything. It wasn't horrible. But it wasn't until the 1980s when the whole Cold War thing happened, where people started thinking, oh, I have a chip in my brain, or the FBI is after me, the FBI is talking to my ear. The classic paranoia that you hear about didn't really start happening until the 80s, according to this paper I read. So it really depends on the context of things.
Hmm.
And I often have wondered about the connection between dreams and psychosis and stuff because it is a very interesting thing. I've never experienced sleep paralysis. I do experience catatonia, which some people try to link those two together, but I believe they share overlap. I don't think they're close to the same, even though both ends up paralyzing you. Your body just paralyzes you. Uh, but yeah, it's really interesting that culture shapes what psychosis is. And I am very fortunate in the sense that the vast majority of my psychotic symptoms have been positive. For years, my voices were my best friends and were able to help me through immense amounts of anxiety. Like all of my stuff in New York where I was having that psychotic break, I did have one voice that was there with me through the entire thing. His name was Orion. I have not heard about him in years, or heard from him in years, because when I started taking antipsychotics, he went with them, like he went away. But he was like my best friend. He was my companion. He helped me out on exams in college and helped me with anxiety attacks, panic attacks, everything. So it's kind of interesting that a lot of the people in the States with the content of psychosis is very dark and dangerous and scary and horrible. And then I'm just there like, hey, my voices were helpful.
Hmm.
So, which is a perspective you don't really hear about a lot, which is why I want to say it all the time.
Hmm. But I wonder how many perspectives there are because, of course, most of the people aren't making YouTube, so we have no idea
Hmm.
really. I mean, someone might, but what was I going to say? Um, it would be interesting to see if in different cultures, how in different times, how it's been, whether it's become more fearful. That was something I wanted to ask about was the paranoia because I know that's a thing, another thing that people I think typically associate with schizophrenia, and I don't know how common it actually is. Like I know that is a subtype or something you can tack on the name, right? Say paranoid schizophrenia. You don't have to add paranoia to the name, right? So it's
Well,
variant.
what's interesting though is that the in the DSM-5, which is the latest diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders, it does not have the paranoid schizophrenia, disorganized, catatonic, undifferentiated, and that's what it used to be. But with the latest edition that we have now, it's actually all schizophrenia spectrum. So it's just listed as schizophrenia and then other disorders after that. Like there are other psychotic disorders like schizoaffective disorder, like what I have, that's in there. But schizophrenia is just schizophrenia because what they found was that the people that were kind of fell into those categories, they also kind of fell into more than one category. So they just made it all one spectrum with
Right.
a bunch of different symptoms. And then that was how they did it now. So a lot of people will still say, hey, I'm a paranoid schizophrenic. Like I hear people say that sometimes. And it's like an older thing. It's like how some people with bipolar disorder say they have manic depressive illness, even though it's been bipolar disorder for a really long time now. So yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay, so that's the yeah. So it's I'm just trying to remember the initial question that I was thinking of was with paranoid is something you think of as being a major feature of schizophrenia, and you're saying that hasn't necessarily always been the case. Like that seems to have been something that, as at least in the West, as it's gotten more technologically advanced. Maybe what you said once we hit the Cold War that it. Okay. Um, okay, so we got all into that because we're talking about delusions and psychotic break. So it sounds like the delusions are more, you say they're ideas that you can't get rid of or beliefs that you end up believing. Is there any? No, okay, so but you did come to question them, obviously, because you're saying either if this is bad if this is real and it's bad if it's not. So obviously at that point you were starting to question whether you were actually perceiving things correctly.
Yeah, so I'm really lucky in the sense that I figured out something was wrong, technically. I had when I lived in New York, I had two roommates and they actually did an intervention for me probably like shortly before the break really got started. Or maybe it didn't get started. My time is hazy, but they had an intervention with me and they tried to get me to move back home. And I said no, because I thought I was totally fine. But they were realizing something was wrong. And that should have been a thing to me saying, hey, maybe something is really wrong here. But it would take a little bit more time before the God that I was worshiping started to be less lining up with Christian theology. Like things started not adding up. And I kind of started feeling that while I still had something that I had no choice but to believe in, I started thinking, I'm like, maybe it's not the Christian God, maybe it's something else. And that shift was like, you know what? I wonder if this is all in my head or not, because things were shifting, they were changing, and they quit making sense. And like not that they really made much sense before per se, but there were inconsistencies, and it's a really hard place to explain. But I kind of started feeling that a lot of what I was lining up with, like my voices, for example, like I was starting to realize maybe I was hearing voices, like maybe what my thinking, wait, that was actually voices and stuff. And it kind of dawned on me a bit over time because typically psychotic episodes they have three phases. They have the prodromal phase, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, which was that year little up. Then you have the acute phase, which is what I'm talking about now, where I was like really deep in it. And then there's a residual phase, which is when things kind of start calming down and fading. It's like the natural conclusion to a psychotic episode. And I was approaching the residual phase when I realized something was wrong. At least that's my own personal belief with it. But a lot of it was me going to my doctor saying, hey, I believe that these people in my life are going to die. I can't not believe this. I have a God that's talking to me and telling me things, and I can't shake him. I also think I have voices. I think I'm hearing voices. And it was just me spitting out what I was experiencing to someone who knew how to deal with that kind of stuff. And so it was kind of like when he gave me my first antipsychotic, I was hesitant to take it, but I was like, something's wrong. Maybe this is what's wrong with me. Maybe this will fix it. Like maybe this will fix me to make it like I can be who I was before. I can be myself again. And yeah, so a lot of people will get like an intervention. The intervention will be the thing that gets them help. Maybe they'll end up in a psych ward and they'll get help that way. But for me, my first big thing before I hit recovery, which was a whole different can of worms, but that initial bit, I did figure out something was wrong and I sought out help. And I'm very fortunate that that happened.
Again, the dream analogy comes to mind because, of course, you can believe all kinds of things in a dream, and it,
Mhm.
and then I don't know if it's as you wake up. I had heard that's what it was. Is when I think you're more likely to realize it's a dream. I've certainly had that experience of realizing a dream is a dream, but it seems as though the dream kind of evaporates shortly after realizing it.
Yeah,
Which,
actually, that makes sense. How you
yeah,
can be in a dream and believe something that's like you just automatically believe it. Yeah, that's kind of how delusions work.
is it hard partly to remember because your thinking was different?
What do you mean, remember? Like, remember what happened?
Yeah, like
Or,
the sequences or to explain. I'm just wondering whether it's such a different state in some ways. I mean, obviously you're going around and you're doing things, but does it almost seem like a dream or like something else to think back to that time? It-
let's see. Because I have a really bad memory from that time because the psychosis really messed with my brain.
well, that's yeah, I'm wondering that too.
I definitely was like I definitely felt like I was living in a different world than everyone else. And I still get that feeling sometimes, like today. I do sometimes feel that way in general, like in my regular life. I'm like, I feel like I'm on a different plane. But back then, I definitely did think that I mean, I thought I was in everyone else's world, but I really was in my own. And so I guess like it was kind of, I was lost in it. And thinking back to it, yeah, I don't remember it very well. I really don't.
Hmm. And I'm assuming you were seeing this doctor all through that period of time because is this the same doctor who you saw in high school and before? So like surely at some point it was obvious that something was amiss even before you just said, "Oh, I'm having all of these experiences." Wasn't it? Would he not have been able to tell?
So the crazy thing is that I say crazy loosely, of course, because we're talking about mental health, but I I'd been very honest with him about my moods and whatnot, but again, I didn't know I was experiencing psychosis when I heard voices. But every time I would go into his office, I would have to fill out a questionnaire. And there would always be something saying, "Are you hearing or seeing things that others don't?" And every time I would pause on that question and I'd think, should I say yes to this? Because I'm not sure. And then I never said yes to it. But every single time I saw that, I'm like, oh, something's here. But yeah, no, I've had the same doctor the entire time. He diagnosed me with my first mood disorder and then all the way up to the schizoaffective thing. He's been great. He's been great. And he's not necessarily diagnosed me wrong per se, because things did get worse over time and whatnot. And I wouldn't say that I met criteria for schizoaffective when I was in high school. My moods were not
Right.
as severe.
No, I'm wondering
But
like halfway through, if I get the period right, it was around a year. Like halfway through this God talking to your business, I would have thought that it might have been something that would have come up.
oh
Like
no, cool.
I'm gonna die and like no,
It's because I was religious. It's because I was religious and the people in the church around me fed into it. They genuinely fed into it and were like, "Oh, God's talking to you. I wish he would talk to me." And so I was surrounded by people that
right.
were like kind of egged it on. And I think there's a lot of people who go through that kind of harmful stuff because they didn't know any better and I didn't know any better, even though it was very
Mhm.
hurtful to me. And so I thought, oh, it's just God. This is actually what God is. It's totally what God is, which is why I believed it for so long before questioning it.
Right. And they, they thought this was a good thing. Did they know about the dying part of it?
Yeah, some of
And they
them
thought,
did.
I'm just trying to understand
No, no, ask
a
the
picture
questions.
of
Ask the
what's going.
questions. Yeah.
So then too, I'm realizing something I didn't put together watching your videos or other conversations is the not only is your current diagnosis relatively new, you said 2020, right?
Yeah.
But the you were involved to some degree with the church up till fairly recently then too, I would assume. Like this was when was the psychotic break?
Psychotic break was in the latter half of 2018.
Right. And I'm going to assume that you had some sort of a falling out with the church sometime after that.
I quit going. I
Yeah,
quit
I
doing
would.
any. Yeah, I haven't. The only churches I've stepped foot in have been cathedrals because cathedrals are cool.
They are, yes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's quite an adventure there for a few years there. Like,
It was insane. Yeah.
yeah, I would think it'd be really hard to separate that experience from religion in general. Like lots of modern people have problems with religion anyway, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. But I would think that would just be a major, for good reason. But I mean, it would make it difficult.
Oh, one of my more well-known videos on the channel, like one of the ones that's gotten that's like one of my top videos is actually it's titled Religion, Psychosis, and Me because I had
Right.
so many feelings about
Yeah.
religion from someone who experiences religious delusions, and it was all about me coming to terms with like faith and what that actually meant for me.
Hmm.
And it upset some people, but it was something I was really glad I got out there, and I didn't bash any religions in there, but I just wanted to talk about how it's not just like I've had people in my life, whether it's online or in real life, just tell me that I should just believe in God anyway. But when I explain that my brain has traumatized me to the point where anything even remotely close to religion, specifically Christianity, like will send me into a panic attack. It'll send me into an anxiety attack. Like I just will not be good. And a lot of people try to force that on me anyway. And so I made a video about it to be like, hey, it's complicated. This is how it is. And I got a lot of people in the comments that were like, me too, or hey, this is how I deal with it. I'm in the same boat. And yeah, the internet is it's an insane it's an amazing but insane place for sure.
Yeah,
So
well, that was something I thought of too. Like, how is it? Doing almost anything online, I think, is very questionable for one's own health or sanity, if you will, whether it's social media or it's still an open question whether I want to be on YouTube or whether I'll decide I don't like dealing with all of the people out there or what it is. Guests are fine, it's everyone else that's the problem. But it has, I read your comments, they seem positive, but is that at all a concern that that actually it could just be it could actually harm your mental health to to be dealing with the internet at all?
when I was in high school, I played this mobile game called Clash of Clans, and I was
Stands for it.
yes, I was really into it. I was part of the Reddit group for it, and I was very, very high up in the ranks in that. And it was a big part of my life. And there was at one point where an event happened that was not good for people. Like someone had, like drama had been started, and I decided I was going to voice my opinion. And what resulted from that was thousands of people coming after me, giving one of my friends got death threats from those people. And it was 3 days of on and off crying because of cyberbullying. And I was 17. I was literally 17 years old, and the internet hated me. And ever since then, I've had really thick skin. So people will comment and they'll say some things that like probably really should piss me off. But I'm like, okay, whatever. And I just keep on scrolling. So yeah, it doesn't really. There's some comments that probably bother me like a little bit, but not anything that really makes me want to like throw my phone or anything. So, because I kind of went through trial by fire when I was younger
Of course,
when
I
it came to
wonder
the
too, like whether that's going to happen. Like I see some people who really have, from a fairly early age, they've maybe even made a living on the internet, and they're very casual and they joke about nasty comments and when I say nasty comments, I mean like whole bunches of people who completely misunderstand what someone's position is or what they're saying,
yeah.
misinterpret it, whatever. Like that to me was more bothersome. It's not someone saying something that sounds ridiculous, and when it sounds like they're actually a thinking, talking person who really misunderstood you. But and then I wonder, well, if you get so hardened, like what does that do to you to be able to just laugh that off? But you know,
Well, I think there's a balance between like it's like because like I do have a community on YouTube. Like I do have a community like on my channel and whatnot. And there's a certain balance between realizing that someone's a hater or a troll and then realizing that there's someone who's like part of the community. And I've been pretty good at putting each of them in boxes so I can engage with all of my comments as a result. But there's definitely a lot of people that will just come on and say, like, a lot of people want me to microdose shrooms. And I'm like, my medications work fine. Like, don't need to do that. And there's a bunch of people now that are trying to get me to go on keto. And I'm like, I'm not gonna go on keto. What are y'all on about? Like it's a lot of people. So I kind of just, I don't know. I feel like I am strong enough to like ignore the haters and the trolls and all that stuff while still being able to appreciate the comments I get from people that really care about my content, really care about the channel.
right.
But it took some time. It took some time to figure out that balance. And I think any creator has to deal with finding that balance and what works best with them.
Mm-hmm. What do we got here? Okay, so I'm just trying to think. So are are there other? Okay, you've talked about a psychotic break and given me some sense of that, and that's of course I think what people think of when they think of schizophrenia, kind of to some degree, right? Is they probably think of someone off rambling around, on the street. Um, is there anything? And this is just generic. I'm not looking for actual advice, but if like the situation I mentioned where I met someone on the street. I don't believe he lived on the street, but it doesn't matter. Um, is there anything a person you think should do in their interactions, or should they just steer clear? Like, is there if you meet someone on the subway or something, is there anything you can do to be helpful or kind, or really are you better off steering clear, or do you not have an opinion?
I think it greatly depends on the situation. I think it really depends on the situation because people can be in some really dangerous spots mentally, to the point where you helping them might not be like, they might not accept your help.
Hmm.
Even if you want to help, you might not be able to, like, they might not be able to accept it. And so I have, like, for example, just to flip it a little bit, I have actually been the psychotic girl crying her eyes out on the subway in New York. Like, I have been the person that people shy away from on the train. And I didn't realize I was at the time, but looking back on it, I'm like, oh, I was that person. And no one helped me. And I was so deep in what I was doing that I'm not sure I would have been able to accept help. And so I think it greatly depends on the situation. If someone's actively like harming themselves or actively the S word, like, wanting to do that type of thing, then intervention probably should happen. But everything else is kind of like, it's a case by case basis. It's what you feel comfortable with. And it's such a hard thing to deal with because a lot of people like would think like, oh, I'll just like call 911, but I don't know, cops aren't always good either. So it depends on the situation. It really depends on the situation. But if someone is actively harming themselves or trying to end their life, definitely call somebody. But you have to, again, put yourself in a place where like, would they accept help from you? And you can always try, and they can always say no. That's another option to it. But just as someone who's been in that situation, I'm not sure I would have accepted help if someone tried it. But if someone had, maybe things would have been different, So I don't really know. Um, but it's a hard call to make. It's definitely a hard call to make because every person is different. Every situation is different.
Yeah, and I mean, I know it's not. I'm asking the question more to explore the subject than to actually get a useful answer. But I guess the thing is, too, like, if I live in the country, but I go visit the city from time to time. So to me, I'm not accustomed to seeing homeless people, and those are the people who usually appear to have schizophrenia. If someone's going to, like, I don't know anyone personally, so that's why I'm lumping the two together. Um, and I feel bad about acting like someone isn't there. That feels like a very bad thing to do to anyone
Mhm.
ever. Um, but I'm wondering if someone's wandering along. It's hard now with cell phones to tell whether they're talking to themselves or not. But is it really better just to leave them alone, even if they try to talk to you?
And
I
I
don't.
think yeah, I mean, that's really up to you to decide in the moment,
Yeah.
really, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything? I have some things specific things I'd like to ask about, but also, are there any general experiences or subjects that you like to bring up and you maybe have covered in a video, um, because you think it's easy for people to misunderstand it, or you think it's interesting, or whatever? And then I'm sure once you start talking about something, I'll have questions. So I'm just interested in the conversation. So if there's anything that you've either put in a video or would like to put in a video, um, otherwise I'll just move on. I do have a couple of questions I was thinking about. Um,
I mean, the biggest thing that I try to tell people, and the biggest reason I have my channel, is to say that schizoaffective disorder is different from bipolar. It's different from schizophrenia, but it has elements of both. And so a lot of people do not realize that schizophrenia and schizoaffective are two separate disorders because they use them interchangeably. And so a lot of what I do is like pointing out the differences between the two and like showing that because the schizoaffective disorder is, see, hang on a second. It's dominated by mood symptoms. My doctor described it to me as being basically bipolar disorder, but with voices. And that's really how it has been for me. And so schizophrenia is largely centered around the psychosis, the positive symptoms, the negative symptoms, the cognitive symptoms. And those things they present differently. And while I do have elements of schizophrenia in my condition, I can't say I'm schizophrenic because I don't have some of the other stuff that schizophrenia has. So that's one of the big things I like to separate is that like schizoaffective, schizophrenia, and bipolar are three separate diagnostic entities. And a lot of people do confuse them and whatnot. And so it's a very important distinction for me to make. And I try to make that any opportunity I can.
okay, now I recall, like, I know technically the difference between positive and negative symptoms is not whether they're happy or not. The positive ones are things that you have that someone who doesn't have the condition wouldn't have, more or less, on average. And then the negative ones are things that are removed. And I can't think of what the negative ones are. So can you give
So
some
you
examples?
can have avolition, which is like a lack of motivation. You can have a lack of emotion. And you can have lack of motivation, lack of emotion, like a lack of drive. It's basically things that should be there but aren't. So a lot of people have a blunted affect, which is like not really many emotions and whatnot. And it's that type of stuff. Like the lack of motivation is actually one that I experienced only when I was in a mood episode. So it was attributed to the mood side of the condition. But I experienced when I was in New York, I had a lack of motivation to do chores and whatnot. Like I would be at home all alone all day. My roommates would give me tasks to do, like, here, Kit, can you clean this? And I go, yeah, yeah, totally. And then I never did it. Absolutely never did it. And I didn't want to do it. Even though I kind of want to do it like mentally, but I'm like, nah, I don't do it. And I wouldn't do anything. Wouldn't do anything at all. And it just kind of like looking back on it, I'm like, what on earth? I mean, I was sick at the time, like it was all sickness, but I'd wondered for years, like, why did I not do my chores? And then I found out about negative symptoms and found, oh, they can happen when you're in mood states. Like that's totally a typical thing. So, but people with schizophrenia deal with negative symptoms a whole lot more than like I do. So, like even my doctor, like he's like, you basically have no negative symptoms for the most part. So like I get them every now and then, but not nearly like the everyday all day that some schizophrenics get with it.
And
So
yeah, those are symptoms I don't think the average person would even be aware of. Like they basically think of the illusions and delusions, and that's what they think of.
yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, that's a lot of like schizophrenia advocates, like they're talking about negative symptoms, which is really important because that's actually so hallucinations and delusions and disorganized thinking can be treated with medication. So we have dopamine medications, like medications that affect how dopamine does, because dopamine is a big neurotransmitter in your brain. And they found that acting on certain receptors of dopamine in the brain helps treat positive symptoms. But we don't have medications for negative symptoms. We don't really have anything that helps negative symptoms. And so a lot of people with schizophrenia they'll go to like day program stuff. They'll help them like get skills to like do jobs to help overcome those negative symptoms. But the problem is that like there's not really any way to like there's no pill for it. There's one medication that's in clinical trials right now that is a different way of targeting schizophrenia symptoms, and it is promising in the sense that it actually might treat negative symptoms as well. But I don't know when that would be a thing. And
Right. So they just to me they sound vaguely in the ballpark of depression-like symptoms, but obviously it's a very different thing if they don't have any way of treating it at all at this point. Whereas depression sometimes you can, right?
yeah, you can have like negative stuff can be found in mood episodes and mood states. And when you adjust and correct the mood state, you adjust and correct the negative symptoms as well. That's kind of like, because like anyone who's depressed can say, oh, I don't have any motivation. Oh, I don't have, emotions. I have a blunted affect. Like all that can happen to someone with depression, but then give them an antidepressant and they're not always all better, but the things improve because it was attached to the mood side of stuff. So,
I was surprised sometimes how much a bad sleep can knock out my positive emotion. Like, starts like a lot. Like I recall sitting in a chair once thinking, I don't know if I'd really be excited if I heard I'd won $1 million. Like I would recognize that should be a good thing, but and it's interesting that sometimes lack of sleep can really. And my mother said the same thing from having kids that she learned always get your sleep because you're very different without it sometimes. Oh yeah, that reminds me. I wanted to say in leading up to this, I saw your video about your where you mentioned you have I want to call it a spiky mat. I can't recall what you actually like an acupressure mat. And I had an opportunity to borrow one from a relative just to try it. So in preparation, I like to do some research in preparation for the podcast. So I did do that. Unfortunately, I was pretty diligent 2 or 3 times, and then I started to slack off. But it was interesting. At first, it felt ridiculous because it's pretty spiky. If I feel ambitious, I'll edit in a picture of it so people can see. But it's as far as I know, it's when you hear about yogis sleeping on a bed of nails or something. This is a similar technology, but not as severe. And it does feel like a sunburn at first when I'm lying on it, but then that goes away. I guess I think I was already. Oh, I've got a countdown here telling me I don't have a lot.
yeah, I see it. I see it too.
Remaining. Okay, we got 10 minutes. Okay. Yeah, so that was I was hoping I'd have more interesting things to report. I did wake up at 4:30 in the morning feeling pretty good once, so I don't know if it helps my sleep. I'll have to do it more diligently. But you actually found that does help?
Yeah, I struggle. So for many years, I took sleeping pills because one of the medications I first started taking, it was a mood stabilizer, and it affected my sleep patterns and made it hard for me to achieve deep sleep. So I was falling asleep a lot during the day. And so my doctor put me on sleeping pills, which I took for many, many, many years. And then some stuff happened, and I'm like, let's go off them. And he's like, yeah, let's go off them. And so I quit taking them. But I found that without that, I have a very hard time falling asleep. And so trying to figure out a way to still get to sleep while, yeah, without sleeping pills was like a very difficult thing for me. And when I found an acupressure mat, because there was an excellent ad on social media for it, like it was a fantastically well done ad. And I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna take the bait and buy it. If it doesn't work, I'll return it because I'm buying it off Amazon. And it absolutely changed my life. And I do it like every night before I go to sleep. And I don't know how it like calms me down so much. Like I have fallen asleep laying on it. Like I have
They
fallen
say
asleep.
that in the instructions. Like,
Yeah, it's weird. And I'm like, why would I fall asleep on this thing that spikes that are poking into my back and then it happens and stuff. And I do sleep a lot better with it. And it's honestly like it's better than a sleeping pill because sleeping pills are chemicals and I already take enough meds as is. So being able to fall asleep more naturally, as natural as a bed of spikes can be, uh, is definitely something that I do. And I'm really glad I have that.
hmm. So it just makes you fall asleep faster. So it's relaxing.
Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was just relief once I started to get used to the pain. Like there was the initial, this is ridiculous. I also tried lying down on it once after I did get a bit of a sunburn. It's just that was not so good. But and then I wasn't sure if it was once I started to get used to it that it's just the relief of not being in pain anymore. But I don't think that's it. I don't know. I'll keep trying it. But my thing is I have to remember to do it before I already want to be in bed. I usually
Mhm.
remember it like 5 minutes before I want to be in bed.
Oh, I'll set it up against my pillow and I'll like play video games on my Switch while I'm leaning back on it. Like it'll be kind of like my pillow basically. I'll be like chilling, playing on my video games, and I'm like, I'm feeling a little bit sleepy, and I'll just go to sleep.
Okay, if it works, yeah,
You
I'll give it a try. I'm curious. Um,
think I'm crazy.
I am curious to know if you can help me understand depression.
Okay.
Just, just to change the tone a little bit, um, because like it's something that's thrown around a lot. It's also an actual commonplace word in language. So you'll say, "Oh yeah, that's depressing. That's whatever," and I just want to really have a sense of it. I mean, one thing that maybe helped me is understand it a little bit. Um, is that I think there can be an element of dread to it, which changes it from just, I don't feel like much. But anyways, it's neither here nor there. Like, can you throw a bunch of
Like
moods that
explain
mood?
depression.
Yeah, I wanted to try to understand what it feels like as much as possible, and hopefully other people will as well. And it's one of those things where people might say, "Oh, you can't really understand it until you experience it." But I'm like, can you just kind of throw like moods and words and whatever at me and see if anything sticks?
So it's kind of like there's a fog over my entire like brains. Like everything is kind of not as bright anymore. And I don't really have the motivation to do the things that I love because the things I love just don't have the same effect. And there's just this immense feeling of everything being difficult. Getting out of bed is difficult, eating is difficult, going to work is difficult, doing everything is just so difficult. And it's just like, yeah, it's an uncomfortable feeling. I don't feel like I'm fully me. I don't feel like there's no happiness. What is happiness? And it's kind of hard to explain because it's just like if you've never experienced it, you don't really know what it feels like. And so it's kind of like imagine everything being more difficult than it is normally. And like everything is an insurmountable task. And there's just this massive wall you have to climb over every time you want to do anything. And that's how it is for me. That's how it is for me. And and I'm sad. My brain goes to very dark places when I'm depressed. And it's it's interesting because I've been depressed so many times that I know how to deal with it now. So I almost have a protocol on how to deal with it. But everything else, it's like it really is just everything for me, it comes across as everything being absolutely difficult. Things that would be so easy for me are incredibly difficult. So
what can you? I'm trying to understand what would make something feel harder to do physically. Um, which may be an odd question, but anyways, because that's a very common thing. Like you can't get out of bed and so on. And I'm just trying to understand more. Like, is there anything else you can say about what that feels like? Is it actually an energy thing, or I know it probably gets tricky where motivation mingles with actual ability to move, doesn't it? Like motivation, the word has to do with moving. Um, but I do have some understanding of feeling less positive emotion. As I mentioned, if I get a bad sleep or a couple bad sleeps, that can happen. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't know if I get a little bit of seasonal affective disorder as well. It's not consistent, but I have had it around February where that'll happen, or in the evenings. I just feel miserable um, and don't enjoy it a lot. Um, but it's never affected my movement. I've always been pretty able to move. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know what kind of an explanation I'm looking for, but is there anything else that's like that at all, or
I mean, it's just there's like so one of the symptoms of depression and major depressive disorder, like the criteria, is actually moving physically slower. So not necessarily it being difficult to get out of bed, but just being very slow in movements is also part of the diagnostic criteria that you can have in order to be diagnosed with depression. So,
and
which caught me off guard when I was reading about it. I did a video on depression a while back, and I was like, whoa, that's a symptom. Interesting.
hmm, okay. I'm still looking. I'd love to be able to really sort of feel these things, but I don't know how to go about. Do we need telepathy? Um, let me see what else I got here. Um, I guess one of the things or a couple of things that I found useful when I started watching YouTube's yours and others about schizophrenia specifically, or I guess I should call it schizoaffective disorder. It always sounds excessive to me, like because what I'm mostly curious about is the positive symptoms, like the illusions and so on, which I think of as just being part of schizophrenia generically. So,
Yeah, it's the schizophrenic side of the
so
condition. Yeah.
that's why I think of that. Like I think, well, I'm not asking about the affective part. I'm asking about the yeah. But anyways, on the one hand, I realized, and I didn't know before, that people can be quite can can actually have fairly good lives and can do the things that you would expect an average person to be able to do. Um, and it's like their life isn't just a miserable. Not everyone's doomed to be wandering around the street or something. The other thing is that it's even with medication and management and so on, it can still be pretty rough. Um, what I'm wondering is, do you have any sense of how how commonly people are able, whether it's in the States or the West or wherever, to get some kind of help, or how, like, statistically, are more people like, completely struggling, or
I wish I knew.
you
I wish I
know?
knew how to answer that because I don't really. Because it's like a lot of people don't really talk about it, so we don't really have a lot of ideas of people being able to overcome this stuff. And like when I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder, even I was like, how am I going to be able to do anything? And I didn't have any way of knowing if I could live a normal life or not. Like I found a few like blogs online, and there wasn't really stuff out there, and there's still not a ton of stuff out there. I mean, it's like if you go online, you see advocates like, yeah, you can live a fulfilling life. You can do this, you can do this. But there's also the reality that for a lot of people, those things aren't possible because the condition is that bad. And so it's honestly a spectrum. And it's not that everybody can live a fairly average life. It's not that, but it's like what the normal is for a person depends. It really depends.
Okay, so after um, after you got your brand new diagnosis, post psychotic break, um, was there more of interest to tell?
Like to talk to people?
No, I mean, is there anything like that you'd like? Yeah, is there anything else that happened after that you see think is an important part of the overall picture?
Well, I'd say the psychotic break itself was like the impetus that started the whole thing. Because actually, the ironic thing is that after I recovered from the psychotic, well, after I recovered from the initial bit of the psychotic break, like got the right meds and everything, I actually was diagnosed with bipolar 1 with psychotic features because I did not tell my doctor that I was hearing the voices all the time, constantly. So he diagnosed me with bipolar 1 with psychotic features, and I started taking antipsychotics at that point. It wasn't until 2020 where I said, hey, I hear the voices all the time. And he's like, oh, you're schizoaffective then, which again comes back to that whole thing I said earlier about how it's basically bipolar with voices for me. But I would say that coming back from New York, I had this period. It probably took me 2 years to fully recover from everything because I had a lot of issues with emotion regulation and knowing what was up, what was down, getting a handle on what was going on with my life. And I would say that the biggest thing that helped me was something called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And I was in a DBT class for a year. And in DBT, they basically teach you life skills. They teach you how to regulate your emotions, tolerate distress, practice mindfulness, and have relationships with other people, like interpersonal effectiveness. And it really taught me things that, frankly, I should have learned when I was younger, but I didn't have opportunities for a wide variety of reasons. I never really learned the things that I should have. And so I learned them in DBT, and then I recovered from most of my stuff. And I'd say now I'm at a point now where, like, yeah, I did recover from psychosis. Sometimes people ask me if it's possible to recover from psychosis completely. And for me personally, I've managed to create a life that I believe is worth living that looks like post recovery, but I still have cognitive effects from my episodes that I can't recover from. But yeah, I mean, the big thing is I want to say is like recovery is possible. It just might take some time. And it wasn't just, oh, I had a psychotic break and got meds. No, it was, I had a psychotic break, I got meds, and then it was 2 years of hard work in order to get to where I am today.
You just said something about the effects. I think the effects of the psychotic break, or the something lingering.
Mm-hmm.
What's what was that?
So, manic and hypomanic episodes are basically your brain redlining itself. So it's going full blast, full speed, and oftentimes people in mania and hypomania, their memory is impaired because things are just going so fast that their brain can't encode the information. But my doctor said that manic episodes and hypomanic episodes were very similar to concussions, because similar to brain injuries, because they do damage the brain because it's redlining itself so constantly. And so before I had any level of a schizo disorder at all, I used to have a near photographic memory. I was top in my class in high school, like top 10. I didn't have to study. I could remember basically anything. And then I started experiencing repeated hypomanic episodes, eventually culminating in the manic episode that was led into my psychotic break. And I went from being what I firmly believe is a smarter version of me to where I am today, which I still have intelligence, of course. Like I know I have intelligence, but it's not what I used to be, and that I'm never going to be able to get that back, because the way the brain works is when it's damaged by psychosis or it's damaged by mania, it will compensate. It will heal in its own way, but it won't heal to be back to where it was before. It kind of like will grow in certain areas, and it kind of like how after someone has a heart attack, their heart can like adapt to it and continue working, but it's not exactly how it was before the heart attack happened. So it's kind of like that with the brain. And so I have a horrific memory, like a really bad one these days, and I just write everything down and whatnot. But I would say that the interesting thing on that topic is that right after I had my psychotic break, I remember my dad came to visit me when I still lived in New York, and I forgot what we did the day before every day of the trip. Like to this day, I don't really remember hardly anything about that trip with him because my brain was so fresh off the brain damage of a psychotic break that it couldn't encode new information until much later. But now I can remember what I did the day before for the most part. But back then it was just like this. I was like, whoa, I am seriously impaired. Like, is this going to be my life forever? Like, what on earth is going on here? And it's because it was manic with psychosis. And yeah, so there are lasting effects. And I don't really see people talk about that all that much. But it's definitely a little a very important thing. And you can even see like cognitive issues in people with depression. Like it's crazy how like people with depression will have horrific memories as well as a result of their conditions. Like mental illness can affect all sorts of things in the brain. And we do need to talk about that more for sure.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't heard about that at all. Was it something that was a problem, do you think, while you were experiencing the I guess you said hypomanic as well as psychotic symptoms, or was it more afterwards?
Oh,
I would think it would
like like me realizing that I had the deficits or
the memory, yeah. I'm
I
just
didn't.
I'm wondering like if it could be one extra complicating factor if you're going through this period of of um, of psychotic symptoms, and then also if you have an increasingly peculiar memory, like who knows, that would make it easier, make it harder to tell what's real or to that for me certainly. Just for example, like when I had my wisdom teeth out and they put me on some kind of anesthetic, I know my memory was patchy waking up from that. It was just notable because I haven't had that been under anesthetic. Maybe that was the only time. And I remember my memory coming back in pieces after that. Just for the like the hour after I woke up, like it was still coming together. So I'm just thinking, yeah, that could. It seems like that could be an aspect of it too. Is that you would think if your memory isn't working as well, that would make things more dreamy and weird, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like, I mean, thinking back on my time when I lived in New York, I don't have many memories of it at all. And a lot of it is kind of like a dissociative fugue state at times. Um, like just kind of not being totally there at all. Like I am amazed that my roommates never like tried to drag me somewhere.
Hmm.
Like I'm actually looking back on it, I'm shocked they didn't do anything more than an intervention. So
Hmm. So, trying to think of a way to smoothly move into this, and I don't know how. I know somewhere in your past there you refer to I believe it was in high school maybe to self harm, and that's something which I have almost no understanding of. Not like the other understanding of the others, but it's something where again I'm trying to understand from the point of view of the person doing it what's going on. So can you help me understand that at all?
So I hesitate to answer this because I don't want anyone listening to get any ideas about why I did it. So I don't want to say, because to me, it had like the reason I did it was because it helped
Well,
in the
that's
moment.
exactly what I'm trying to understand because
Yeah, but I don't want to, but I don't want to go into detail so on how much it helped because I don't want people thinking that they should do it to get the same effects. That's the only thing I'd be worried about. The reason I did it was because it helped me like it was just how I was able to get through the day. But if I go any further than that, I don't want to give anyone any ideas. So because it's not good.
okay, that's too bad. Maybe when we stop recording or something because yeah, because that's the thing to me. Like it sounds so bizarre to me. I I'm miserable about something. Okay, so I'm gonna make my life worse. That's the way. So obviously I'm missing something.
Well,
Um,
there are endorphins involved. Like there are endorphins involved with it, and that's like an interesting sciencey thing to get into. But
oh, we're back
yeah,
to our acupressure mat.
yeah, it's endorphin. Yeah, endorphins are a thing. So
Okay, well, then I'd recommend people try an ice bath. I think that's supposed to do that too. Um,
cold plunge,
yeah.
no,
Actually, I forgot you were talking about that. Was that you on a podcast that you're saying you'd never do that?
never do it. Nope, nope,
Yeah.
nope, nope,
I
nope.
haven't tried it with actual ice. I've tried going into because I'm right near Lake Ontario, and so I've tried going in there when it was way past swimming season, um, and cold enough that I breathe like I can't control my breathing initially, and I have to get used to it and calm down. I think no, this isn't going to work. But the rule is just okay. You just keep walking out to about waist height. You can stop at any point and go back at any point, but just give it a chance first. And I'm not really
Mhm.
one for discomfort, but anyways, and I found it was an interesting experience. But I haven't done the real ones with the ice cubes floating around. Um, okay. Yeah. So I'm just trying to understand. I guess what I'm trying to do is paint a picture of what it's like to be you from the point of view of schizoaffective disorder, if that's the technical term.
It is, yeah.
So that's why I'm kind of hopping around through your life, just trying to paint a picture so that people have something, including me, have something real. Um, so are there other aspects of your life or experiences that jump out as being important to how it's how you to helping me understand what it's been like for you?
Well, I talk a lot about like symptoms and pain and like horrific things that happen to me, but the other half is that like I'm a very creative person. I love doing creative things. I have a bunch of creative hobbies. I mean, obviously I love editing, filming, scripting, all of that stuff. And it's like I'm more than my mental illness. And it's like the experience of me, like yes, I have like sometimes I get confused in my head about what's me and what's not me. And sometimes I get delusional at times and stuff. And it just like it's like I I almost have this like comfortable feeling of being like I guess the best way I can put it is I have a healthy distrust of reality because so often reality is messed with me. Like my brain will just make up gods to worship and uh, premonitions that aren't actually premonitions. They're just things. It'll just make up stuff, and it's like I feel like I sometimes like live in this world where it's like reality's over here, psychosis is here, and I'm kind of left walking a line in the middle. And it's like I can't be like I can't be all the way over here anymore because I am in treatment, thank goodness, and I can't be all the way over here because like there's still stuff coming from that side. And so I go through my life and I live a fairly normal life. I have a full-time job. I live on my own. Like I have hobbies, everything. It's very nice. I love it so much. But there's still a sense of like there's still times where I feel like I kind of go off the deep end for like a few hours. Like I'll just feel like, oh, this is, reality's getting messed with again. And I think that's just the reality of living with a psychotic disorder. For me, it's just that psychosis is always going to be a part of me, even if it's not there all the time, even if it's rare, even if it doesn't happen very often, it's still going to be there and it's still going to show its face because that's just the nature of having an episodic psychotic disorder. So I guess, yeah, I guess just I just walk this line and no one really can understand it the way that I understand it because everyone's different. And that's just how it is for me.
Do you think you said a healthy distrust of reality? Is there any way do you think this has helped you to like? Is there any are there any benefits that have come from these experiences that you think actually are useful? Like I wonder, for example, when just I don't know, this is sort of a train of thought here, but when I was mentioning that the closest thing I could think of maybe to depression that I'd experienced was what I'm calling seasonal affective disorder. It hasn't been diagnosed. It's just miserable in the winter for a little bit. And what I realized then is when I hear people talk about dealing with depression or coping with depression, I thought it meant like finding a way to get rid of it through medication and exercise and diet, whatever they do. And I'm pretty sure what it actually means is finding a way to function as best they can while still potentially feeling miserable sometimes. Um, and I wonder if from that kind of thing you can actually come out. Do you ever? I don't know if this is a productive line of questioning. Do you ever wonder looking at someone else who hasn't had to deal with that and think that it'd be nice if they'd had that experience because they like it's been useful to have to figure out how to deal with that?
Well, I wouldn't, if I had the choice to get rid of it, I would.
Right.
I absolutely would because before the schizoaffective hit, I was going to go to medical school. I was going to be a doctor. I wanted to be a plastic surgeon, traveling the world with Operation Smile to fix kids' cleft lip and palates. And that was just what I wanted to do with my life. It's still what I wish I could do with my life. But I mean, I guess to spin a positive note on things, I guess that because I've been to the bottom so much and I've experienced so many bad things, I'm able to appreciate life more, living more, people more, because I know how bad it can get. And I think there's a certain level of, dare I say, empathy that comes from having such a wide range of emotional experiences. Because as someone with bipolar symptoms, I've experienced every emotion under the sun like 100-fold times over. And as a result, it's like, okay, I can identify with a lot of different feelings. And also schizoaffective disorder itself is almost an umbrella term for most major mental illnesses, not like personality disorders, but biological ones like schizophrenia and bipolar depression, anxiety, etc. All of that is under that umbrella. And because of that, I've been able to relate to a lot of different people. And so I guess having all these symptoms and stuff has helped me be a better person in the sense that I can help other people. Like that's kind of the reason I started my channel, is because I realized, hey, I've been through all this crap. There's a way that I can use it to help other people, and that spins it on a positive note, because I've dealt with so much pain because of my disorder that I'm just like, I just want to make it something to actually help other people. And it's just like, hey, when something bad happens, I can just, be like, hey, it's okay. Like, I'm not alone and all that stuff. And that really helps a lot. But yeah, I mean, funny benefits are like, I know how to take 12 pills in one go. So I can do that. I know how to hold multiple conversations at the same time. I can do that pretty well. Stuff
I,
like that.
when something that I thought was sort of an interesting experience for me is that it's taken a few weeks. It's been a few weeks or well more. It's been more like a month, I guess, that we've been planning on having this conversation. And in that time, there's been a bit of back and forth on Twitter, and I saw. I'm telling our audience that you put up a video saying that if I understand correctly, that you were experiencing some symptoms of psychosis and were concerned about that encroaching in. And that, by the way, I actually did get a little bit of felt like I was understanding a bit of what it was like, that there was a sense of dread and pressure from behind that you sort of described, and being watched, that at least to me causes me to feel something. And so I was wondering, well, do we want to go ahead with this or what? And then you're no, I think I'm fine. I mean, you didn't say it that way, but and then you said you're going to see your doctor and try and do something about that, and then you posted a video saying that you. Well, first off, I saw there was a post on Twitter you put saying that I think it was due to the medication, but you didn't say that the voices were gone in your head. It was really quiet, and I thought it was a question that whether it was in good or bad taste to send a tweet. Okay, so it's just going to be the two of us on Wednesday then, and then you put up a video when the medication really kicked in about how it had almost wiped out your ability to have a conversation, and so then I was thinking of saying, okay, it's just going to be me, and like you're just going to watch. But
oh, that's funny. That's a good one. Oh my God, that's good. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was interesting for me to actually be sort of a part of that and think, okay, it'll be interesting to see how this affects. Like it's interesting to me how, or at least I don't know, it was striking to me that you were pretty sure that you wanted to do this and you were going to make it. Like not, I want to have a nap, or like I am sure that myself and other people have canceled appointments for lesser reasons, But I suspected so. That's why I said I imagine you'll figure it out. But anyways, it was just funny when I was thinking of those things. But so, do you actually? You mentioned having multiple conversations at once. Do you? I hadn't thought about this until you mentioned it. Have like a few voices going on in your head while you're trying to talk to someone?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Now,
For sure. They will like when it's actually acting up, like if I'm in like more of an episode or something, like they'll occasionally insult the person I'm talking to. And sometimes the insults are really good, and I have to fight the urge not to laugh. I will say that. I had one voice that would make fun of my professors in college in the middle of class, and I'm like, can you not but his shoes look so stupid, stuff like that. So but for the most part, if I like fully engage myself in a conversation with someone, I don't have to worry about them. But if I'm experiencing a lot of symptoms, it's like they will fill the gaps in like silence. Like if there's silence at all, like that'll be like, hey, talking.
Is it on topic usually? Like, is it part of the conversation, or they just have their own?
No, it depends. It really depends.
Okay. So it could be like you've actually got multiple conversations going on at once.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there's only been times the way I can just think my replies to them.
Right.
So like I don't have to I will sometimes talk out loud if I'm alone. Like if it's just me. Sometimes at work I'll have my AirPods in and I'll be able to like talk out loud at that point, because talking out loud helps me tell the difference between me and them at times. But I can talk internally, kind of like using my internal monologue to
Right. Well, it
communicate with
sounds like
them.
it's just multiples of those, and only one of them has you in it or your awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
So then I would think like this is kind of a well, you probably do you even really have to think in words, or can you just think an intent? Like I would think almost if I heard someone say something in my head, I'd probably already have a response. I wouldn't have to try to think it; it would just happen. So I'm just wondering, is it almost like they're talking and you're feeling at them, or do you actually think, like you say, with your own monologue back?
Well, they kind of like, so it is my internal monologue that they react to and whatnot, but it's like they still, like, you can't lie to yourself. Like,
Right.
you just can't. You can try, but it doesn't work. And so, like, if they like ask me a question, I will automatically reply back because that's just what you do when someone asks you a question.
Mm-hmm.
And then whatever the response is in my head, I can't necessarily like, it's not like I can keep something from a voice. Like they are already there, they hear it. Like my voices know me as a result, right? Because they're in my head, right? So yeah, but not like intent, but it's like my internal monologue, like I think in words. I absolutely think in words. And as a result, it's like that's how I communicate with them and that's what they hear, but I can't like lie to the voices. It's just whatever my brain spits out is what they respond to. So
It does sound a lot like a like that doesn't strike me as a particularly peculiar thing. Like it doesn't sound that different from what to me is normal life. It sounds a bit different. Obviously, the fact is that they are more independent. But I mean, like for example, if I watched a movie or was I don't know reliving having a you have fictional arguments in your head with people, but I mean with real people. Are there ways where some sort of a voice will almost come in like it's somebody else? It's not, but it almost does happen. Like it doesn't seem so different. Whereas the external voices, that seems more unusual to me.
well, I mean, it's exactly the same as an external hallucination. It's just happening on the inside of your head. So you still get a person that has a personality and a certain way of speaking and certain opinions and whatnot. And it's just like, it's just inside your head, not outside. It's not like a character in a book or anything. It's not like that. It's like literally having another person there. It's just they're in here at the
Mm-hmm.
time. So
Do they ever remember things that you don't that are
no,
correct? No.
no.
Darn.
No.
Much for the study.
When I was in college and I had Orion, my main voice for a long time, helping me out on my exams, he knew exactly as much as I did. Like he didn't know things that I didn't know. So if the voices knew things that I didn't know about, then I'd be thinking, So about DID, about dissociative identity disorder.
Well, I was just thinking,
Yeah.
like, if there's information that comes in that you don't pay attention to, but it's somewhere stored in your brain. It's, the same way that if someone puts you under hypnosis, they can have you remember things. I think details about a situation that you forgot. So I'm just thinking maybe you've would be a way of accessing different parts. Or when people have take magic mushrooms or something in large doses and go different places and talk to entities and so on. And if it's just them, like I'm not, if you don't add a religious or spiritual interpretation to that, they're just whatever they're doing is in their own heads. So maybe there are ways that you can have sort of split personalities or things you've. Anyway, um, what else was I had a thought at the back of my head. Um, well, so you you went to you were intending to be a doctor. How far did you get?
Oh, I graduated with pre-med. So I did pre-med in college. I had uh, a combination of 5 years of lab experience. So I worked 3 years in a sequencing core and then 2 years of research. Um, and then I did a bunch of volunteer work with Operation Smile. I attended two of their student conferences. I was part of one of the medical missions, and I met the co-founder of Operation Smile on that mission, and he was going to write me a medical school recommendation letter, which would have been amazing. I had hundreds of hours of shadowing in operating rooms and had a bunch of volunteer work at hospitals. And then I had other things that made me well-rounded. Like I traveled, I did cosplay. I have an art history degree as well. And yeah, so I had all of the, I don't know, all the stuff that they'd want. And the thing that really kept it from me is like I graduated and then I had the psychotic break that took my memory. It took all of it. And then it was just like, no, you actually can't do this. You also have a really serious mental illness and you cannot do this. And it was a really hard thing for me to grasp. And I still struggle with it a lot because I did get pretty far with it. Like my whole life, like I wanted to be a surgeon when I was 7 years old. Like I genuinely thought, like 7 years old, I wanted to be a plastic surgeon and like fix people's faces and help kids and then reconstruct people that had in horrific car accidents, like all that stuff. And yeah, I got pretty dang close. I mean, I was planning on taking the MCAT and going to medical school, and then the schizoaffective hit, and I'm like, I can't do that anymore. So yeah, I got really far, is what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's too bad. But it's interesting. It does give you a very interesting perspective, I think, as someone on YouTube, to
Hmm.
have that sciency medical background. Um, the one other thing I had here that I was really interested in, I don't know if we can get anywhere about in it or not, is understanding more about suicide. So I
Hmm.
know that's something you mentioned you're willing to talk about. Um, I'm kind of just bringing it up out of the blue. But does that fit in here?
Well, I think there is something in my life that happened that changed how I felt about that type of thing. So I had been fairly like suicidal over the years like from middle school, frankly. Go figure. A lot of stuff started in middle school. And I went through college. I was still feeling that way. And then this is an interesting story. I don't get to tell this one very often. So my first day of my sophomore year of college, I went to the very top of my dorm, looked down, and I was like, this would do. And that was how I was in a dark place at that point. Like that was like, okay, if I can't do blank, blank, and blank, I'll just do that. And I didn't really think much of it. And then I was walking back from my classes one day and I was on the phone with my brother and we were talking and I'm like, hey, yo, I kind of want to get a sandwich, but I also kind of want to go back to my room. What should I do? And he said, go get the sandwich. Come on, you have a dining plan. And I'm like, okay. And if I had gone straight to my dorm, I would have watched someone do my plan in front of me. Meaning that when I was getting my sandwich, someone jumped off the roof or off the top level of the dorm that I had planned on doing if things went south. And to put it plainly, it kind of sent me into a panic. I was hysterical for several hours. They gave me anxiety medication because it was that bad. And over the next week, I had the horrible opportunity to see what would have happened if that had been me, if I had done it. And the reality is that it affected a lot of people. It messed with a lot of people. The campus was sad. People were sad. It was just people were raising mental health awareness because they're just like, we can't have this happen again. This is horrible. And it was just like, oh, I can't do that anymore. That's not an option for me. And that was really what changed from me being mildly suicidal ideation a decent amount of the time to no, I will keep living no matter what because it's not worth that. And it took me a long time to really come to terms with that. And it's still really sad that that guy did that. But the only green lining to it was that I didn't, I'm not going to do that.
Mhm.
So, but it was really sad. It was really horrible. And it was this weird out of body experience. It's kind of like, I don't know. It's very specific and stuff. But it's the biggest reason that I'm not dead right now, frankly. Because it's not worth, I have too much to live for to do something like that. So, yeah.
I would think it would be extremely bizarre to be in the position you were in, and to for him to have done it when you were thinking about it the same way.
Mhm.
Like he would feel like it was connected somehow. Um, it's interesting. I have heard, I tend to think of the. I don't know if I have anything useful to say here or not. Um, of people trying to encourage people who are suicidal to value their own lives more for their own sake, but I do have the impression that actually what may be most helpful is thinking of it like you were saying from other people's points of view. Maybe because it's harder to argue against, whereas your own thoughts and if it's just how you feel, you can say whatever. But if you're thinking about other people, you can't argue your way out of that as much.
Well, it's really important also to have someone like, because you don't like, because it, you don't stay alive for other people, you stay alive for yourself. That's a thing for sure. Thinking about other people, like for me in my case, it was more like I don't want to do that to the people I love because it's not worth for me. So yes, thinking about other people in that sense makes sense. But when it comes down to it, I chose to stay alive because I wanted to live, because I wanted to keep going when I really didn't, like previously didn't want to. Like I was the one who chose to take the step forward and not, just put one foot in front of the other and just keep walking and just keep going. Because the thing is, if it's other people can leave. Other people can be gone. Like you have to, you were stuck with yourself your entire life. So it's like staying alive for yourself is the most important thing. And there are other factors that contribute to that, but at its core, it's you taking care of yourself first.
Do you think too, just because you presented me with an interesting scenario there, that I would think if I was contemplating suicide, my imagining might end at that point. Like that's as far as I imagine. That's the whole point, is to end it. Whereas this gives you a glimpse into what's past that for everyone else. So it's
Yeah.
almost like you get to see what you didn't think of. Um,
Yeah. 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 And there was a lot I didn't think of. There was a ton I didn't think of. And I'm forever grateful that my brother made me go get that sandwich so that I didn't have to watch it. Like I am so, so grateful for that. So,
yeah.
because it was already bad enough with, yeah. Yeah.
Um, I know I'm kind of asking questions all over the place, but
You're
that's
good. You're good.
the way it goes. But I'm there's the expression, and you mentioned it, suicidal ideation, which is a little bit mysterious to me. My impression is that it's almost like images are, well, the intrusive thoughts is another phrase that comes to mind. Like you're already feeling lousy, lousy being an understatement, of course, and images of how you could actually do it come to mind. Is that correct?
I mean, ideation is more like um, wanting to go to sleep and not wake up. Like for me, it was I wanted to stop time, take a nap for 100 years, and then come back. That was really what it came across with me. It's like thoughts that you might be better off dead, that kind of feeling. It's when like you're making plans, there's like I think that's different. I think ideation is just the idea of it is what you want. So
I would think, well, I don't know, like the idea of going to sleep and not waking up is a pretty, I would think that a lot of people might think that at some point in their life or another. I don't know, it seems, it's a lot less extreme than actively intending.
yeah, which is why it's ideation and not an attempt. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, is there anything else about that as far as how it's generally talked about or thought about that you have any thoughts about?
I mean, it's just basically, yeah, you gotta come up with a reason for yourself to make your life worth living. No one can do it for you.
I mean, just as an example, like one thing that bothers me, and maybe it's just a silly thing, is how often people will use euphemisms and they'll talk about someone whether wondering is someone thinking of hurting themselves? And I think, well, they're not thinking of hurting themselves. That would be like self harm or something. This is a different thing, and it just bugs me that imprecision just to tiptoe around it. And as you can imagine with the podcast, like I don't want to tiptoe around things. I'm just wondering if there's anything, having had direct experience with it, if there's anything that you think people generally don't think of, or like people who have no experience with thinking of suicide or knowing anyone.
Well, I think something I can add is that so since I have self-harmed in the past and have been suicidal in the past, just because I've self-harmed doesn't mean I wanted to like end my life. Like there's a thing, it's called NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury. And the vast majority of people who self-harm do not want to die when they're self-harming. Like it's not meant as a way to flirt with the idea of death. It's comes from a place of pain and wanting a relief from that pain by a different kind of pain, basically. And so a lot of people think that because, oh, if someone's cutting themselves, they want to die. Oh, they're trying to kill themselves. Oh, they, whatever. No, that's not the case. That's not the case. It's meant as a emotional release of energy. Sometimes it's self-punishment. It just depends on the person. But the two are not, they're not as related as it seems. Because you think you see someone cutting, it's like, oh, they want to die probably. No, they don't. They don't. They just want to make it through the other day, and that's what they're doing to cope with it because things are really that bad.
Hmm. Um, is there anything else here? Well, I asked you, oh, I don't know, it was a few weeks ago, if you had any questions that you could think of for me, which is a really vague question for me to ask you. Um, but what I'm thinking is, and if you don't, it's fine, but is just, is there anything about, let's pretend I'm cognitively average, whatever you want that to mean, like, or just generally am ignorant of mental illness or whatever. Is there anything that you'd want wonder about, or I
Yeah,
don't know?
there's one thing.
Okay, good,
There's
because I
one thing
wasn't sure I
actually.
was even asking a meaningful question.
No, no, no. So one question I have for you is that there's certain words that have shock value to them. And those words are things like psychosis, schizoaffective, schizophrenia, psychotic, all of that stuff. When you hear those words, I know we're kind of in a state where like humanity in general is trying to be more accepting of mental health and stuff. So like when you hear those words, as of now, like what do you really think of when you hear them? Like what do you feel when someone mentions those words? Because for me, they're normalized. Like I can say the word psychotic and it doesn't have anything in my brain. I just view it like another word. But I know that when I talk to people about my symptoms and about what I have, there's kind of like a, oh, she used one of the P words. She used the P word.
Hmm.
Like, and I see like a visual change in their face, and sometimes they treat me differently once I say that word as well. So, what are your thoughts on that, the shock value of it, and how does it make you feel these days in a world where we're trying to be more aware of mental health?
Well, I'm trying to think of if there's been a situation in real life where someone has referred to themselves that way. Um, having depression. Depression's about the only thing I can think of. Like honestly, I have yet to meet someone who says, "Yeah, I was in psychosis last Tuesday." Like that hasn't happened. Um, it would be surprising because of the reality that they were of the fact that they were saying that this fairly extreme experience had happened to them in the same way they said, a shark bit my foot off, or I found $1 million, or like, um, I don't. There might be honestly a hint if it's someone talking about themselves or someone they know. It depends how close it is. If it's distant, it really doesn't. It's just information to me. If it's just someone talking about something that happened, or it's on the news, or as far as if it's fairly close to me, then I could feel like a little oh no, because I tend to think that that's just
Mm-hmm.
potentially dreadful misery. Not that I'm thinking that, it's just that's what I would feel if it was they're close enough that it would matter. Um, I've already watched quite a few YouTubes and thought quite a bit about this, so it's been for a long time I've been interested in um, as before my channel, but in the spirit of my channel, in understanding different experiences, and particularly mental illness. And for whatever reason, I think I don't know for a fact, but I suspect I've had little glimmers of, let's say, mental turbulence myself. So it's a little bit more something I think of. Um, so other than that, I don't know if there's a more specific question you'd have about that, but like not.
Well, when you hear the phrase psychosis or psychotic, what do you think of? Because for me, when I thought of it back before I knew what it was, I thought of like that person on the train who's talking to no one and whatnot. And in reality, for me, psychosis was totally different because I had it and I didn't realize it. So
Mhm.
for me personally, it was like the conception I had was just But it was
Yeah.
different, like, because I thought of it a certain way, and then when it happened to me, I'm like, oh, this is totally different. But I'm curious as to other people's thoughts of like when they hear that word, what do they think of? Because I want to know what goes through people's heads when I say it to
Yeah.
them, you know?
Well, I mean, do you want me to try to imagine if we hadn't had this conversation and I encountered you and you described yourself? Like, that would be a different thing than me trying to, for example, remember some years back how it might hit me if I just heard it generally. Like, I agree, certainly, as I say, I think I would imagine most people that think about these things, certainly for me, I associate um, symptoms of schizophrenia with the crazy guy on the bus, with homelessness, with that's where I've encountered things that seem to match it. When you say psychotic, I've actually only heard people use that more to describe someone being violent, and it's very casual.
Hmm.
If you do that again, I'm going to go psychotic, or you must be psychotic. Like it's so meaningless that it only suggests a sort of berserk, hallucinating rage or something. It doesn't really
Hmm.
register as a real word. It's just something people throw around for emphasis. Psychosis sounds sufficiently technical that I think almost more like someone in a hospital or somewhere, like they're out of commission,
Interesting,
um,
interesting.
just because it's sufficiently medical sounding. It
Hmm.
doesn't really. Whereas hallucinating is something that I think of as more conversational. Um, I think a lot of it has to do with, yeah, like either someone on the street, someone on the bus. I think that's the most common. Again, I live in the country, so I don't actually deal with it. It's just something sometimes I go to the city and then I do. Um, so that's probably it. Um, Now I'm kind of intrigued by this question. What would I think of if I hadn't watched your channel and I met you in person?
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you bring it up? Like, what's the context?
Well, I mean, I would just be like, I have a psychotic disorder. I deal with
Well,
psychosis. It's like,
like, are we co-workers or are we
I don't,
at a
it's more
club?
that
Maybe
I
we're
just
at
want to,
you mentioned you were go to historical reenactments. So maybe I'm thinking of going there, and you mentioned that.
they
Um,
didn't have mental health care in the 1700s.
um, Depending on the context, I'd be curious. I'd want to ask. I'd want to make a point of being of appearing to not be phased by it. That's something it's important to me generally, is whatever, to not be phased. Um, there'd be a little bit of caution I'd be feeling, because I
Hmm.
don't. This is if I strip out like a few years now of watching YouTubes and so on, where I'm now at least aware of. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's quite possible for people to be quite. It's not only high functioning and doing impressive things, but I mean even just like you can have a conversation and it's just perfectly fine. Like they don't have to. There's no psychotic rage, to go back to that. Um, but there's still just, okay. What does this actually mean? Definitely, if it was someone I thought I was going to be dealing with more, like we'd say we're at a club or something, we're going to be, I mean, like involved in some joint activity, I might think, okay, this could be a problem. But I don't know, so I'd want to ask and find out more. And I'd do a milder version of what I do on the channel. I'd hope, just try to make it more comfortable and talked about. To
Yeah,
me,
you do a pretty
joking.
good job of like trying to understand things, which is
To
really,
me,
really good.
joking about things is the thing I go for. It hasn't always worked, but I feel like if you can do it, it does a good job of separating the person from the thing, but then also showing some degree of acceptance and curiosity, but not being ridiculously careful. Um, so yeah, I don't think those words particularly. They'd have more impact if it was closer, like if someone says, some family member says I've been diagnosed with this thing, but then I'd say, well, I haven't noticed anything so far, so you got it under control. Yeah, because like it's, I don't know. That's my answer.
No, that's a great answer. That's great. That actually answers it for sure. That was what I wanted to hear. Cool.
Maybe I'm just oversaturated though from trying to learn about this stuff.
No, keep learning. Keep learning. The
Yeah,
more
yeah.
people
No,
learn
I
about it, I
mean
think, yeah,
just like
yeah.
I'm not may not be representative of you have to grab someone on the street and say psychotic and see what the response is.
Oh my God, do that on the streets. Oh my God, I get hit so hard. You're
Yeah.
like, rah, rah, rah. So,
They might believe you anyway. So just to finish up, I might cut this if it doesn't go anywhere, but I'm just curious because you did mention historical reenactments, and you didn't mention it. You posted a picture of it or a picture or two of it, and so I'm really feeling like I'm missing, like the whole modern technological thing is starting to drag me down, and so of course I have a podcast, and I'm trying something like a historical reenactment, although the historical part appeals to me. Like, so, what's that like?
A reenactment, like what I do.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So so my dad is like really big in 18th century sewing. Like that's his special interest. And so he makes all the clothes that he and I wear, and he's the one I go to events with. And so we do events on the American side of things. I've also done events on the British side, but we only reenact Revolutionary War. I don't touch the Civil War with a 10-foot pole. Don't do that. But I've been on the American side, I've been on the British side, and basically it's 18th century camping. So we're wearing 18th century period accurate clothing, top to bottom, and then we cook 18th century food in 18th century pots, and we sleep in 18th century tents that have no bottoms. And I'll say I sleep on a cot because I don't want to sleep on the ground. But plenty of people in the regiment that I'm part of, they will sleep directly on the ground on top of a bunch of hay.
I should hope.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I can't do the hay because I'm allergic to it.
Yeah,
But
I wouldn't want it. No, I wouldn't want to do that either.
yeah, it's but I love it so much, and we just hang out on the fire. I mean, the people who portray men will go off and fight in fake battles, like they have actual like period accurate weapons and they shoot blanks. So they have like gunpowder and everything, no bullets, but and they'll just like reenact a battle and everything. And then there's some events where it's more of a civilian thing, like the battles are military events, and then there's more civilian events, which is actually where my dad, he portrays a tailor and I portray his assistant, and that's kind of like, so we'll stand there with our supplies, and then the visitors will walk up and we'll explain 18th century tailoring and all this other stuff. And my dad will call me a dumb apprentice because I don't know everything, and it's just it's a fun, like, I hesitate to say role playing, but it kind of is role playing for sure. It's kind of like 18th century LARPing, for lack of a better term. But don't tell my reenactor friends that I said it was anything close to LARPing.
Well, to be honest, I mean, it sounds funny when you described it. When I have heard the phrase historical reenactments, I only thought of the battles, and I thought that sounds silly. You're having pretend battles.
Oh, it is so funny to watch because like the men, like they're like middle-aged and older. So my dad is in his 60s, and they're like 12-year-old boys with fake guns. Like literally they will like run around and just do all sorts of like stuff like, oh, and then they'll come back and they'll tell stories of how they like managed to avoid this person, and they're like, oh, I died, but I died in the shade under this tree, you know. Like, so they don't have to lay in the middle of the sun and feel. It's funny. There's like, you see this person came with the horse, and I was like, oh, I love it. Engaging the inner children.
Yeah. The cooking, honestly, is more the part
Oh, the cooking is so good though.
I like cooking and with stoves and
cast iron cookware.
Yeah. So
oh,
yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah, the 18th century camping appeals to me. Though the bed is an issue, but anyway. I'd like to do that. I'd like to like sleep outside and make my own something or other. But yeah, there is the whole sleeping on the ground thing. But
I sleep on a cot. I cheat.
Yeah.
I cheat.
Well, I mean, you still got the dirt and the grass right there, so that's not totally.
I have a little ground cloth. I have a little cloth on the ground I can put all my stuff on. But the grass is right there. It is still right there.
Right. Okay, I think we're done. We talked about wrapping it up in this segment, and yeah. Is there anything else you want to say, or?
Yeah, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. It's SchizoKitzo.
I'll put all your stuff. I forgot to mention this. I'll put anything you, within reason, anything you send me, I'll stick in the description.
Yes. Follow me. I'm on all social media platforms at SchizoKitzo.
Should I get on Instagram? I've run into a couple people who seem to be using Instagram a lot more, and is it silly for me to be doing this without being on Instagram?
You should totally be on Instagram. Absolutely.
Would I have to post pictures though?
Or videos.
Okay, okay. Maybe I can take stills or something. I've wondered about developing a more personal side to it rather than just the conversations. But mostly I wanted it to just be the conversations. I don't know. I think it'd go to my head if I do too much. It's just me. But anyway, thanks a lot for talking. I've had fun, and I do believe I won't know till tomorrow probably what I've actually learned as it sits in. I know I've been hopping around a lot, but I feel like overall we've probably painted a picture that will be useful for people. And yeah, if you want more focused, planned, deliberate, maybe even artsy videos, do go check out Kit's stuff on her channel. And yeah, perhaps we will meet again.
Thanks for having me.
I'm sorry, but I'll hang on directly too, right? Because it's weird to pretend end and then not really end. So when I end the podcast, it's really over. Anyways, yes, thanks for talking. Talk again.